Hello, everybody.
Welcome back to another podcast episode of Bookish Brigade.
Today we are going to be talking about one of my favorites. You might have heard about him. He goes by Dr. Death, but his actual name is Doctor Christopher Duntsch. He was a spinal surgeon who did some fucked up things that we're going to talk about today.
Mm-hmm. And so just to preface already, I don't know too much about this. Bailey and I are almost doing a little switch where I knew a lot kind of about McKinley Manor. She knows a lot about this. So I'm going to be experiencing it with those of you who are watching. And so we're basically doing a little story time today.
Yes, story time on Dr. Death.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I think I'm going to start off with a little bit about where he started. So
Okay.
Chris Duntsch, he was originally from, he's originally from Memphis, Tennessee. He was born in Montana. He went to school in Tennessee. He originally was really big into like football, and that's what he did. Before he decided he wanted to do surgery, he did football. And one of the earliest things that you learn about Chris is that he can't take failure. When he played football, he was not talented at it. It's widely known that he was a pretty poor like sports player. And when he was on the football team, like if he couldn't do something right, he would just do it over and over and over and over again until he got it right. Even if it was just that he just wasn't good at it, he couldn't take the failure. He went to college and he was going to do professional football. And then I think this part I'm a little hazy on. I think that he broke something or he got hurt and he couldn't do professional football. It just wasn't on the table. I think it was that he just wasn't really good either. It just wasn't really on the table. So then he decided that he wanted to do surgery. He wanted to do spinal surgery. So he
drastic change, huh?
Yeah. So he goes to college, right? He does his residency, he does his fellowship. I think altogether he has like 15 years of training. Okay, he passed. He passed all of his stuff. I mean, he did his whole entire residency and he made it like as a good surgeon, right? His first job is out in Baylor, Plano. And I think they're called something else now, but it's Baylor. And he has 5 patients there. The first patient is named Kenneth Fennell. And after Duntsch worked on him, this man had chronic pain for the rest of his life because Duntsch operated on the wrong part of his back. So this guy went in and for just like I think it was routine like back thing. Like Duntsch wasn't supposed to be doing anything super serious. It should not have ended up in this guy who he actually lost the ability to walk. And for the rest of his life, he had to use a cane. And that was Duntsch's first patient. And then his next one is Lee Passmore. And I want to use the actual names of I want to make sure I say their names because these are people who were hurt by Duntsch.
Yeah.
I think in total he had 38 surgeries. And he maimed and or killed 33 of them.
Okay. I'm going to say something.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say this, everybody, I want to preface that I am in no way trying to victim shame at all. At all. But for me, if I am just going to buy something as simple as a bottle of shampoo, I am on Amazon or their website for hours looking at reviews. Even if they have great reviews, I will click the lowest reviews just to see if there's any common pattern of like something. Misconduct, it's just not good for your skin, whatever. If I am having a back surgery, I don't know. I just would look at these. I feel like I would look into these things. That's just me, though.
Well,
that's just me.
And that's understandable, right? Like, that's who wouldn't do that, especially for something as serious back surgery. But here's the thing is he never had any, like, he was never, and this comes out later too, it took years for him to be reported to the board. No one came forward. He didn't have any complaints against him. Like, in all of the time that he was, at least at this very beginning where there's 5 different patients, there was no way for them to know that it was this bad. There was nothing that
So
they could find.
when did he like during what time period was this?
He was at Baylor Plano in, let's see, I think it was 2010, 2011. And they offered him a $600,000 salary to be their, like, on-call spinal surgeon because he had just gotten out of his fellowship. So he had done his he'd done all of his training. Like, he had like years of training. He passed school. He was a PhD, MD, like he had it all. He had all the certifications.
I suppose I'm going to be devil's advocate right here. I suppose 2010 the internet was still there was internet, but I
Yeah.
guess it's not as information wasn't as accessible as it is today. So, I'm going to say that it's because of that so many people fell victim to this
Yeah.
dude.
It's terrible. It really is terrible. Like, and there are plenty of people who I'm sure would agree with this, that there are other people who should have been charged outside of him, like people who worked with him who saw that he was doing damage, and because they didn't want to challenge him in the
Mhm.
operating room, they saw things that were wrong were happening. And there were a handful of people who had come forward and talked about this and their experiences with him, and who had like said something to him. I know at the beginning, I think it was, it was, so it was his second patient, Lee Passmore, who he was working on, and there was one of the doctors who was operating with him. His name was Hoyle, Mark Hoyle, Hoyle. I'm not sure how to say his last name. Hoyle. He was a vascular surgeon, and he was working with Duntsch. And when he cut into Lee, he misplaced hardware, and then he had stripped the threads of the screws so that they couldn't be removed in this patient's back. And then he was bleeding a lot, and the other doctor, Mark Hoyle, was trying to tell Duntsch, like, he's bleeding a lot, like, you need to stop, you need to pay attention to this, like, this is what you need to be doing. And they got into an altercation in the operating room, and Hoyle had told Duntsch that he was dangerous, and it led him to, and in the way, most of this information I've gotten from like Wikipedia. I've gotten from there's a podcast named Doctor Death that I originally listened to, and it's really good. It's on Spotify, it's on Wondery, and then they also have a show about him now, but I haven't watched that. But
Yeah.
and then the next one was Barry Morgoloff. He went in to get a damaged disc removed and then replaced with hardware. Duntsch messed that up, leaving pieces of bone in his spinal canal.
Bro.
So he's left someone who has to walk with a cane for the rest of his life because he paralyzed him. The next one almost bled out on the table. The next one, he he left the pieces of bone in his spinal canal. And then because of that guy had so much pain, he then became addicted to opioids and painkillers. And I believe, he went to go do a follow up with Duntsch, and he walked out because when he went to go do the follow up, Duntsch was drunk in the doctor's office. And
Dude.
that was just patient 3. That was just 3. At this point, something should have been like said. Like, I don't understand how nothing was
Yeah.
reported. And then this next one is a big one because it's his best friend. His best friend, Jerry Summers, he had an old football injury, and he was actually helping Duntsch run his private practice. He was kind of helping him with everything. Like, it was told that Dunch was really bad about like time management. He was really bad about finances. Like he couldn't really take care of anything himself. It was kind of like Jerry did everything for him, and
Mhm.
Dunch just fucked up patients.
Mhm.
So Jerry actually moved to Dallas with Dunch to help him open his own private practice. And Jerry lets Dunch work on him. And during his surgery, there was a lot of blood. Like Dunch did something and Jerry was bleeding a lot. And there's this foam that you can put in there. And I'm not a doctor, so for anyone who's listening to this, I know not
You're
all
not?
of this is, I know, right? It's surprising. Um, but just make that clear.
Mhm.
He put a bunch of that foam in his like in the like where he was operating on the back of Jerry's like neck, his spinal cord, and he put so much in there that it cut off the blood flow. He lost, I think it was 1,200 milliliters of blood, almost 24 times the typical amount during a spinal fusion. That's
Is
how
bro
much blood he lost.
still alive today?
He died in 2021 of an infection related to the complications from his surgery. But after that initial surgery, he became a quadriplegic. And he spent the rest of his life in a full body wheelchair because he couldn't move anything below the neck.
Dude, that is
And
crazy.
it's crazy. His best friend at the time. And after he did that surgery on Jerry and fucked it up, he didn't want to go see him. He wouldn't go into Jerry's room. He wouldn't tell Jerry how bad it was. He was like, "Oh, it's gonna get better. You know, like this is just like recovery." He was basically lying to Jerry, saying that like, "Oh, this is temporary." And
Well, here's another question. Like, was he that it? Was he lying, or was bro, because he had made it to that point, did he believe what was spewing out of his mouth?
that's one of the big questions around Chris Dunch is did he because some people speculate that he only did this, he knew he wasn't good at it, but he only did it for the money. And then there's the people who read everything, see everything, and it seems as though Dunch truly believed that he was a good surgeon. And it was just happenstance that these patients were getting hurt. Like it didn't have anything to do with him. It was just because surgery, there's always a chance, right? Like it's never 100%. And that's the
Right.
main thing. And because of that, also, that's why he wasn't prosecuted for such a long time because it's incredibly hard to sue a doctor for something that happened inside an operating room because surgery always comes with chances.
Right. Right.
And that's one of the reasons he got so far too, is because no one wanted to pursue charges on a surgeon because it wasn't common. I think his was one of the first times that a doctor was like prosecuted for something they did in an operating room. And then the fifth patient that he worked on at Baylor Plano did die. Her name was Kelly Martin. And he severed an artery in her spinal cord when he was working on her, and she bled out. And
Bro.
it led her to have she hemorrhaged and then I think had a heart attack. So then they revoked his privileges permanently at Baylor Plano. But instead of firing him, they allowed him to resign, which in turn meant that they didn't have to report him. And so he moved to Dallas Medical Center. And that was, I think that was still in 2012.
Bro, this is all in a span of like 2 years.
Yeah, he only operated for under 2 years because he went to prison. The lawsuits happened in 2014. So yeah, this was between 2012 and 2013.
Mm-hmm.
He goes to Dallas Medical, and when he's in Dallas, he works on, I think it's 3 patients, and one of these is the big one that got him like put in prison. So the first one is Floella Brown, and she's a big one. He went and did surgery on her, and when he was doing surgery on her, he messed something up, Some of his biggest things were cutting things that he wasn't supposed to be cutting and putting hardware in places that it wasn't supposed to go. Like he
Mhm.
was just drilling screws into people's, like there's a point where I think it's not Floella Brown, but the woman after her, Mary Efert, who he drilled 3 times into the muscle in her back with a screw, and it was supposed to go into the bone. I and that's it's crazy to me because they really do, like there are a lot of people, even me when I first listened to the Wondery podcast about Dr. Death, that he
Mhm.
truly believed that he was a good surgeon.
Bro.
He really like it it's crazy. It's crazy
Also,
that
it makes me think that he like those these lies that he was spewing, I feel like he had to have believed it. Like maybe
mhm,
he was like a I'm just throwing ideas out here. Don't know the dude. I've never seen any footage of him, but like narcissistic or had some sort of like god
he
complex
did.
and he had got yeah, he got to that point to where he was at, you know, so he's like, I clearly know my stuff. Don't know how he got there, but
He did believe that, and I'll tell you why. Because he wrote an email to an old assistant of his, who and in the email he compares himself to Einstein, the Antichrist, and God. He At all three of those, he said, "I'm somewhere in between those three." And then he mentions becoming a cold-blooded killer. But in the context of the email, it's not him saying he's a murderer, like he's intentionally
mhm.
killing these people. It's more the narcissism, like talking about how he like has the power to be God and play God and do this with his patients.
Brother, ugh.
I know. I know, brother.
Ugh, brother.
So
God.
yeah, he's in. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's nuts. I'm like shocked because I just
Mhm.
can't believe he got to the point.
Yeah.
Like there are people that are like good people that just like
Mhm.
don't make like people who are very intelligent but just like don't pass the
Yeah.
qualifications to get there. So the fact that this guy did it to me is just like
So after he worked on Floella Brown, she became brain dead, and she was in the ICU. And during this time is when he started to really go off the rails. So she was in the ICU and he left after her surgery for hours and no one could get a hold of him. And then he had another surgery, which was Mary Eford. And he was supposed to come in and do a back surgery on her, which was just supposed to be small. It wasn't supposed to be super big. He showed up late to her surgery, still hadn't checked on Floella Brown, who's in the ICU. And the people who are working with him are telling him, like, you need to go check on her. Like, you need to go check on your patient. There's something wrong with her. And he's like, oh, there's nothing I could do right now. I don't even think he tried to explain himself. I think he just went and worked. He just went directly to the operating room to work
mhm.
on Mary Eford, during which he severed one of her nerve roots. So it's like a like bundle of nerves in the back of her neck. He cut it out of her, and she lost, I think, the ability to use like half of her body. And he left screw hole, and she's the one who he left the screw holes in her like muscle. It was supposed to go into one of her vertebrae, and instead of screwing it into her vertebrae, he put it in like 3 different places in her muscle in her back, which makes my back hurt just thinking about it.
Bro.
And then he had placed hardware, and it's later said by there's Surgeon Robert Henderson came in to salvage what he could for Mary Efert. And during that time, he had taken x-rays or had x-rays taken of her back. And then when he cut her open, he literally was able to take the hardware and pull it out. It wasn't even attached to her. So that means that she was laying in a hospital bed with metal moving inside her back. When she woke up, she was in incredible pain.
I bet. Yeah.
Like, and then so Robert Henderson is one of the ones who helped get Chris Duntsch put away because he pushed. He said, "This is wrong. There's something wrong with this guy. This was gross negligence." Like, he thought that he was an imposter. So he called the residency and the fellowship program on Dunch's resume to check and see if he was an imposter. And when he found out that he was the surgeon, that it was him, he wasn't an imposter, he could not fathom how he made it that far. And then he brought it to the hospital board that he was working at, I believe. But
Mm-hmm.
he still hadn't been reported at that time. So I think he's killed two people at this point because Mary Efert then died, or not Mary Efert, Floella Brown dies.
Mm-hmm.
She was pronounced brain dead. She had pressure in her head. At one point, when he was working on Mary Efert, he tried to say, I want to do a craniotomy on Floella Brown because she had pressure in her head, and that's what caused her to like be like in a coma.
Yeah.
And one of the doctors that was in the operating room with him was like, we at this center, at this medical center, we don't have the tools to do a craniotomy. And Duntsch was like, well, that's why you're a nurse and I'm a doctor and I'm telling you that we're going to do it. And when the nurse told him no, he said, I want to speak to your higher ups. So the nurse then went and got his higher ups, who also told Duntsch, we're not doing a craniotomy. We can't do that here. She needs to be moved.
Mm-hmm.
And then she was moved and then later pronounced dead.
Dude.
And it's so something that comes back from his past is that when he was in college, he drank a lot, he partied a lot. When Jerry Summers was in the hospital after his surgery and he wanted Duntsch to come speak to him because Duntsch wasn't coming, it had been like days. He had said that the night before his surgery, him and Duntsch went out and had an orgy and did an 8 ball of coke, but then later retracted that statement and said the only reason he said that was because he wanted Duntsch to pay attention to him. Which
Bro,
makes you
what?
wonder, what did they really do that night before the surgery? Because then a lot of other things came out that Duntsch had like baggies of cocaine in his desk. He kept a bottle of vodka in his area, and people knew about this stuff, and he was still performing surgeries.
That's freaking wild, dude. The fact that his like look, if you and I were partying the night before and you were performing my surgery the next day, mm-mm. Mm-mm.
No,
No.
no,
Not happening. Especially anything to do with clearly what this Dr. Death guy does, mostly like the back, spinal, the brain, the most
so
complex
dangerous.
parts. Yes, the most complex like doctor you can be. Bro, what? Like
Yep. And
his best friend was brain dead before they even started. I said it and I don't regret it.
even his girlfriend at the time, he had a girlfriend, Jerry Summers, and when he told her that he was going to let Chris Duntsch work on him, she said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Yes." And she didn't push it any further, but even she questioned it. And during the Wondery documentary, I believe they went back and they talked to some of the people that Chris lived with during college, and they said that he literally forgot everything. He would leave his keys in the front door every day. And every day he would accuse someone of taking his keys. He'd be like, I know y'all took my keys. Where are my keys? Why did you take them? And they were always in the front door. He'd leave them there. He was always doing cocaine. He was always getting drunk. There was even a point where one of them had said, I would never let you work on me. I would never let you perform my surgery. And that was before everything. This is when Duntsch was still in college.
Yeah.
So some people saw it.
That's
Okay,
nuts.
and then sorry, go ahead.
That's nuts. That's all I gotta say. That's just crazy to me that he went on for so long.
Hmm.
He passed all the things he needed to pass, supposedly, and he was just still existing for so long. That's just crazy to me.
He was such a bad surgeon. Like I don't think that he had any like great grand surgeries. He only did it for like 2 years. I don't understand how homie had his PhD.
Yeah.
How did he make it that far? How did he pass?
Well, and it makes you wonder, right? Like if you're someone who's like victim to that and you make it long enough to live, like who would you even like could you sue the people that gave him those qualifications?
I don't think so. No, no, you can't because they haven't.
That's crazy.
It's I genuinely don't. And even like so there was it didn't come out until later that during his residency he actually had to go do a like a program for doctors who had it was kind of like AA for doctors or like NA Narcotics Anonymous.
Yo, they need to put that. They need to put that on like a public
Mm-hmm.
thing for people to
Yep.
know.
It was not no one knew about that until later on that he had to go to a I think it was a Narcotics Anonymous program for doctors because he had I think that he had gotten in trouble about some drugs. Like he was on drugs at one point and he got caught. And but no one
That
knew
should
about that till
not
later.
be allowed, though.
No.
That a
No.
program like that should not exist. That should not be okay. If you are a doctor who has problems with drugs, you should not be a doctor.
Well, and I guess the loophole, right, was that he wasn't technically a doctor yet. This was just when he was still training. So they were like, "Oh,
That's
well,
like,
if you're in training and we fix you, then it's fine." But they didn't fix him.
bro, that's like being a pedophile, but actively being a teacher. Like, that is not
He did a
okay.
program. He did a program, so it's fine.
That's nuts. That is so not. That's my jaw's to the floor. I don't even know what to say. I don't even have words.
It's crazy, right? This is just crazy. Like you read this and you're like, this can't be real. Like he made it too far. Like how did he? This can't be real, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it
Because
is.
there's so many little details. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
being a doctor or being a lawyer are probably some of the most like they are the most like
Mm-hmm.
complex jobs you can have, some of them. So yeah, the fact that bro got there,
I
don't
know.
know, dude.
I know. And so we're getting kind of to the point though where he does starts to kind of like jump off the deep end, right? So he performs the surgeries on Floella Brown and she dies. And then Mary Efert and he severely damages her. Her entire left side was paralyzed. She was in excruciating pain. And then they had called in surgeon Robert Henderson to fix Efert as much as he could. And he went in and he saw the imaging and he was certain that like legal action needed to be taken because he called the surgery an assault. Um, he went in and fixed it as best as he could, but she still lives with like pain. Like most of his patients, if not almost, like it's almost all of them, live like the rest of their life with chronic pain
Mm-hmm.
in their back. Back pain is probably one of the worst pains that you could have.
Mm-hmm. Anything
So
connected to like neurologically and your spinal, yeah,
yeah,
those are some of the worst.
so important parts of your body. And so they didn't report him to the board because at the time he had temporary privileges. He was only in Dallas for 3 days. By the way, let me make that. Sorry, I totally forgot. That's like the biggest part. He was there for 3 days and he killed a patient and severely maimed Mary Efert, which is crazy. 3 days and you
Mm-hmm.
fucked up, royally fucked up two people.
Yeah.
So then he leaves Dallas. He doesn't get reported because at the time he was new and he still only had temporary privileges in the operating room, and at that time hospitals weren't required to report doctors who had temporary privileges. So because they didn't have to, they didn't report him because it'd be bad publicity, right, for the hospital.
Politics.
Mm-hmm. And then he went and worked for Southampton Community Hospital in Dallas. So he lost privileges from Dallas Medical and then got temporary privileges at this new hospital. So he was just hospital jumping because no
Yeah.
one was reporting him and no one was saying anything. So his resume looked great because he had like 15 years of experience, all of these hospitals he's been to. And I even think that he did some like project startups at the beginning of his career. And then he actually got sued out of that And that's when he, I think, took the job to be the surgeon. Because, and then at some point during all of this, he had gone into debt, like $500,000, because
Mhm.
he just didn't know how to take care of money. So then he goes to this new hospital, and he works on a guy named Jeff Cheney. And then after he works on him, Jeff Cheney can't use the right side of his body. He drilled into his spinal cord and left him paralyzed, partially paralyzed from the neck down. Um, and then he worked on Philip Mayfield, who has to walk with a cane for the rest of his life because paralyzed the right side of his body. He's paralyzing all these people.
Mhm.
Like, all of them were left with some kind of paralysis where they couldn't use their legs, their body. Like Jerry Summers was a quadriplegic; he couldn't use his body for the rest of his life. Mayfield actually died from COVID back in 2019 or 2021, excuse me. And his wife said it was because he was vulnerable to the virus, and she blames Duntsch because he wouldn't have been immune, like his immune system wouldn't have been so vulnerable to COVID if he hadn't have been fucked up by Duntsch.
Mhm.
And then he works on Jacqueline Troy, and this one is rough because he damaged her vocal cords and her trachea because he cut so far into her neck that he cut her spinal cord. I mean, her vocal cord. Like, he really did not know what he was doing. He cut her
Isn't
vocal
there
cord.
isn't there like a I'm sure there's an actual term for it, but I don't know it, but like a ratio thing that you're supposed to that I thought that people in the medical field track your good results ratio to your bad results ratio, even if it's like do they not ask these things? And sure, like maybe not deaths, he might have not had to document right away because a lot of these people it sounds like they didn't necessarily immediately die. Some of them
Mm-hmm.
did, but within that time span, but like
Yeah.
I don't know. Like how do you I guess then again, how do you call something a successful surgery? Is it just that they live? Like
Yeah, because then there's still all the people that he paralyzed and maimed,
right.
fucked up their insides. He should have been reported at the very beginning. That was going to be the only way he was going to be caught before all this happened, is if he got reported. But because no one
Mhm.
wanted to take responsibility for the damage he had caused, or didn't
Mhm.
really pay enough attention to care, he made it that far because no one was paying attention until, I think, Henderson is one of the ones who helped. Henderson and Dr. Kirby were the ones who originally like helped get him put away.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, and those are really like I'm sure there are a lot of people who, for example, like the nurses or staff, people who are knowledgeable,
mhm.
but not necessarily someone with like a doctorate's like where he's at. I could definitely see someone in that position because that's really uncommon. This is a very, very rare circumstance. You never hear a lot of stories like this, like a
Yeah.
doctor who like so I could see a lot of employees and people kind of like doubting themselves, right? Even if they have bad habits, even if they whatever. Like he
Mhm.
made it to this point, so he has to know what he's doing. And doctors they work with other doctors, but not necessarily. So if you're a doctor, you work on your own.
Well, he
Like
was a
someone of your
specialist.
caliber.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone of your caliber works alone often.
Mhm.
So I guess he didn't have a lot of
Mm-mm.
opportunities where there were people of that caliber to question him, only people kind of below, you know what I mean?
It was nurses, right? And anytime a
Yeah,
nurse tried
right.
to say anything to him, he would start fights because he
Mhm.
couldn't take criticism.
Mhm.
Um, I think there's even a story about how when he was it in college? I think it was in college where he had been going with one of his old high school buddies, and they were talking about what a poor wrestler he was in high school. And
Mhm.
the guy that was the friend was like, yeah, you were terrible at wrestling. Like, you really tried, but you were just weren't good at it. And it had been said over the phone. Chris drove hours to his house to wrestle him in his front yard to prove he was better at it. So they wrestled like 2 or 3 times, and Dunch lost every single time. He said, "Okay, give me a minute." He went and sat in his car, and the friend went back inside, and he was like, "He's really here right now, trying to like," because they're adults now. They're adults, and Dunch comes back like 10 minutes later. He gets out of his car. He goes and knocks on the front door again. He's like, "Okay, I think I know what I'm doing wrong. Let's go again." Dude, and that's part of what makes people think that it really was just that he didn't realize he was a bad surgeon, because if he fucked something up, he was like, "Oh, I'm just going to keep doing it until I get it right," you know?
Mhm.
Except he never got it right because he wasn't good at it.
Mhm.
He, I think, worked on two more people. Marshall Tex. He was removing a piece of his spine, and then he was supposed to put in hardware. He didn't put the hardware in correctly. It was just floating in his back. So he had metal pieces floating in his back. Um, and then I think there was one more. Glidewell. He worked on Jeff Glidewell. He mistake. So I do remember a part about this. So when he was working on Jeff, he thought that a piece of his neck muscle was a tumor. So he refused to keep working, and he like closed him up and went and told his wife that Jeff had a tumor and he wasn't going to be able to finish the surgery, and that they did a biopsy and it came back as, I think, cancer is what he told her, or had been biopsied and he couldn't keep working on it. Whatever. I don't know if he said it was cancer or not, but he told her it was a tumor. That he never biopsied it. Like, it wasn't biopsied or anything. It wasn't a tumor. It was later found out that it was just a piece of his neck. Like, it was just his neck muscle. And then
Oh.
he then went back and worked on Glidewell, and he cut his vocal cords, leaving only one. He permanently damaged his esophagus and partially paralyzed him. He had to eat out of a feeding tube for a long time. And the only way he could eat is if he ate really small bites of food, like, because of the damage that Dunch had done. He had to talk like this for the rest of his life because he only
Mhm.
had one vocal cord. Homie, it was Dr. Kirby who worked with him and repaired the damage. And he said it was like a crazed maniac because of how much he cut. It was like he was trying to decapitate Glidewell. Like,
Mhm.
he literally, like, oh my gosh. I
So,
know.
and then bro had to live the rest of his life like whispering.
Yep, yep. I don't know exactly which. Oh, and also he sewed up. So there was bleeding. Jeff Glidewell had a lot of bleeding because of everything that was cut. So Dunch put a sponge in there to stop the bleeding, and then sewed the sponge into his neck, which then caused him to get an infection and almost kill him.
There is literally an episode of Grey's Anatomy where that
Yep,
happens.
yep. And that was his last patient. That was the last patient he worked on. And then he lost privileges, and I think his license was revoked. So and that's just so much to fuck up, right? Like, you cut all the way through his vocal cords, you paralyze him, like,
Mhm.
you almost decapitate this man, and then sew a sponge into his neck.
You know that it's gotten bad because I'm not even shocked anymore.
It's that because that's his whole career, right? Is just
Yeah, it's like consistently
mhm.
horrible. It doesn't even sound like it gets worse. It's just consistently each one is just bad.
Yep, yep. And then that was his last patient, and then after that, they pursued putting him in prison. He had to go. He declared bankruptcy, listing over $1 million in debt. He had gotten arrested for a DUI, and this is in between when he lost his license and when he got put in prison. He had a
Mhm.
DUI. He was caught shoplifting. He put a bunch of like expensive things in a shopping cart and then tried to walk out of a store with a bunch, and he got picked up for shoplifting. And then in 2014, he was what is my brain is not working right now. Oh, he was charged with I think it was harm to an elderly person. It was for Mary Efert because she was still alive and they had like the scans of what he did to her.
Mhm.
They were charging him with 6 felony counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, 5 counts of aggravated assault causing serious injury, and 1 count of injury to an elderly person. And the elderly person one was the one that held the longest sentence, which was life. So that's why
Really?
they were trying to pursue. I believe so. Yeah,
Out
like
of all of
he,
those, that's the longest one? That kinda surprises me.
because she was old. Because most of his patients were older. They were like in their 60s,
Mhm.
70s. Like these were older people, but a lot of them were active. Like I know Kelly Martin, the one who died, I know she was pretty active. Um, Floella Brown was, I think, going to be retiring.
Mhm.
Mary Efert, she was
That's so
still.
sad.
I know it's horrible. It's horrible what happened to these people, and that there were so many people around him who had some idea of what he was doing, and it took 2 years for someone to speak out after he almost decapitated a patient because he cut so many things that he wasn't supposed to.
Mhm.
So he's still in prison. I don't think that he was sentenced to life in prison. Um, I think he's eligible for parole in 2045. I think. I remember reading something about 2045.
Mhm.
Yeah, wait, hold on. Yeah, he'll be eligible for. Wait, yeah, he is not eligible for parole until July 2045 when he will be 74 years old.
Bro, that's wild. So that one guy that, he that was his best friend,
Hmm.
did they, like, remain friends
Yep.
after, or did they just never talk again? Like, I know afterwards they didn't talk, but that was just, like, period? Like, was there nothing ever again of
Nope.
that?
They never spoke again. Jerry Summers wouldn't even really talk about what happened with Chris Dunch.
Mhm.
He had broken up with his girlfriend, who he had had at the time of the surgery, who knew Chris. She tried to stay with him. She wanted to stay with him. She wanted to help take care of him. But Jerry was so angry about what happened, he would use his wheelchair as a battering ram and he would hit her. And the wheelchair was like 200, it was like a full body wheelchair. It was like 200 pounds. He was a big guy. So it was like, I think she said like 600 pounds of like him just trying to like ram into her. Like he would get mad and he would just full throttle it because he was just angry. He never really talked about it though. He really got fucked
He
over.
did get it. Well, he got a crappy end of a stick. There was a lot of that, though, that
Yeah.
should have been
He should have known. He
he
should have
should have
never
known
let him work on
and
him.
to go on and then, like, I get you're unhappy, but then he's, like, basically hurting his girlfriend in the way that he
Yeah.
can.
Yep. So she ended up leaving him. And then I know that they interviewed him a few years before he died. And he had a chihuahua, like a little chihuahua that he had. He lived in like an assisted living thing. He got to live on his own. Nurses would come by. And it was
Mhm.
just him and his dog. And he wouldn't really talk to anyone about it. I don't think he ever pursued anything against Dunch. I know that Dunch did have 2 children during this time with a
Mhm.
woman named Wendy. And after everything happened, Wendy came forward and talked about how Dunch had showed up at her place one time and tried to crawl through her balcony and break in. And I think he was on drugs at the time.
Dude.
Like he really went off the deep end. Like I mean, he was already swimming in it whenever he was cutting into these people,
Right.
but like he really like just fucking what what's the Titanic submersible? He really was down there in the depths, just fucking drinking, drugs. His life
Mhm.
went to what's the term, shit in a handbasket?
Mhm.
Yeah, so 38 patients and he paralyzed, maimed and or killed 33 of them.
That is so sad. Like, because I didn't think about how, like what I was saying earlier, like, we are so blessed that we live in a time where we can look these things up.
Hmm.
And I'm sure they had Google back then, but still, I don't imagine it was as detailed as it was. but like just like how many of these people wouldn't have known.
Hmm.
Like no idea. And
Yep.
imagine also like recommending people to this guy not knowing, it's just like
Because there were other doctors recommending them to go to Dunch, and he was actually on the news. Like, people would interview him. He was really popular. At one point, they were talking about making him the face of Dallas, or I don't know if it was Dallas. I think it was maybe Baylor Plano. Like, he was,
really?
yeah, yeah. Like, people liked him, I guess, because he was charming. Some people did, and some people saw the real him. But
Mhm.
it's, yeah, I this this one sticks with me. I really like listening about Dunce just because you learn a lot about checking your doctors before you go and do something as important as back surgery. Nowadays, like you were saying, with what we have now, because back then, yeah,
Mhm.
it's especially because they didn't report him. It took 2 years
Yeah.
to get him reported to the board, so he was just out here switching hospitals. And that's what
Mhm.
happens a lot. That's really common. What I read anyway was that it's really common for like poor surgeons to just hospital hop, because if they do that, then they have less risk of getting reported because the hospitals
Right.
won't pursue it unless you really fuck something up, right?
Mhm. Yeah. It does. It sounds like it's just a lot of, and I'm sure maybe not in this extreme of a case, but a lot of the politics of it all
Yeah.
with hospitals. I'm sure that stuff is just as prominent today.
Hmm. I'm
I'm
sure
sure
it
it is.
is. I
That's
feel like
crazy.
I talked like a million miles a minute in this.
That's how I felt like in the McCamey one. But there's just so much, like so
Yeah.
much, and I'm sure you still also feel like even though I've said all of this, I still feel like there's probably something I'm missing.
There's so much more. I'm telling y'all, anyone who's watching this, y'all should go check out Wondery, check out the Doctor Death podcast, episode 1, and then there's an episode about Jerry and Chris on Spotify. There's plenty of things on YouTube. I mean, y'all should really look into it because it's really interesting. It's really interesting the things that this guy got away with and the damage he caused in
Mhm.
2 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, now he's in prison. He's in prison, and I I don't know. I hopefully he doesn't. It's not like he could go back to working on people. He's gonna be 74
No,
years old, and he's
yeah.
not gonna have a
He
license.
shouldn't. Yeah, I he shouldn't. But the way that this world works, it hurts that it wouldn't even be like the craziest thing I've ever heard
No.
if somehow he did, right?
Yeah, you'd be like, oh, they let him operate again.
That's that's sad. I like just the amount of people, like I just can't imagine the amount of people, like that's a lot of
Hmm.
people
A lot of them are still alive.
life ruined.
Yep. Can barely walk. Some of them, I mean, have to walk with a cane. There was one guy who had a wife and a daughter, and after Chris worked on him, he talked about how he really wanted to kill himself. And it took his wife talking him down because he was going to do it. Like, he was like, I can't live like this. I can't be a burden to my family because I can't even walk. And
Right.
now
Well,
he's
and
walking.
the expenses. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. It's like the only happy thing I feel like we've heard out of this.
Hmm.
The the amount of like financial expenses that also comes out of now having to live
Hmm.
a life that
Yep.
like you may not, like you said with that guy, you may not even want to live. Like, is it even worth it? Like putting myself and my family in all this debt? Like I can't imagine not only the physical but the mental toll that
Hmm.
can take on a person, which does go back to like his best friend who was, really crappy with the
Yeah.
thing. But and how his mood just like changed after that. He was just very unhappy. Like I understand like how that could do that to somebody. Hmm.
But yeah, so that is a lot of information about Dr. Death, or Dr. Chris Duntsch.
Mhm.
I don't think we know what we're going to talk about next week yet.
Nah, we've just been free balling it, really. Maybe next week we'll try and do something a little more upbeat,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Uh,
yeah, that's nuts.
well, thank you guys for listening.
Yes, thanks for watching. We still haven't uh come up with our new name yet, y'all. That's still in the works.
We're working on it. We're working on it.
We are working on it. It's been a long week, you guys. The freaking we had like a huge storm in Texas this past week. So
It was rough. Knocked out power, internet.
knocked out. Yes, y'all. Actually, it was the last podcast we did. If you watched it, the whole way through, there was one point in the podcast where I'm like, "Oh my gosh, did you hear that thunder?" That was the
Mhm.
beginning of it. That
Yep.
was literally the beginning of it until the next day we lost power for like the next 3 days. Not at my house, but I did lose internet. But it's fine. We don't need to go into that because it puts me in a mood.
We're better now. We're better now. We're back. We're
Better
back
now.
on track. We're on a roll.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.